When Lisa Jackson was denied a table at a restaurant due to the color of her skin, she realized she was facing a blatant injustice that demanded exposure. This incident might have gone unnoticed if she hadn't decided to show the true colors of the establishment to the whole city. Her next move would shock even those who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Lisa Jackson, a well-known restaurant critic, approached the entrance of the prestigious restaurant L'Elegance. She knew that this evening could be significant both for her and the restaurant. Her reviews are read by thousands, and her opinion could either strengthen the restaurant's reputation or cost it a substantial number of patrons. Lisa chose an elegant dress that emphasized her confidence and professionalism, along with carefully selected accessories. She always approached her work with full respect for the place and its owners. When she entered the restaurant, a tall man with thick graying hair walked up to the host stand. This was Raymond, the restaurant manager. Lisa greeted him politely and calmly requested a table. Raymond looked at her closely, but his gaze was neither friendly nor professional. He scanned her from head to toe, and despite her impeccable appearance, a barely noticeable dissatisfaction flickered in his eyes. He replied curtly, "Sorry, but I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." Lisa looked at him in confusion. Behind him, she saw other patrons, dressed no more elegantly than she was, being escorted to tables without issue. She noticed that there were free seats in the dining area. A suspicion began to form in her mind, but she decided to hold back, responding politely, "No problem, I can wait. Maybe something will open up." Raymond nodded reluctantly, but his gaze remained cold and distant. Lisa stepped aside and waited near the entrance, observing as other guests walked past her. She felt uneasy as no other host approached her, despite other patrons being seated promptly. After a few minutes, she decided to try again. "Excuse me," she said, trying to stay calm, though she was beginning to feel anger simmering inside. "Is there any chance I could get a table?" This time Raymond didn't even bother to hide his disdain. Leaning closer, he said with barely concealed contempt, "You see, our restaurant maintains certain standards, and I'm not sure this is the right place for you." These words cut through her like a knife. There was so much hidden animosity in them that even the air in the room seemed heavier. Lisa was ready to respond, to demand an explanation, but for a moment she simply froze with indignation. She quickly looked around and noticed several guests glancing at her, quick and cautious, clearly noticing something unusual about her waiting there. Gathering her strength, Lisa finally took a step back to avoid showing her anger and hurt, and without raising her head, she made her way to the exit. Each step echoed in her ears, symbolizing her humiliation. Her heart pounded with rage and frustration, but she knew she couldn't let this incident go. Once outside, she paused, took out her phone, and quickly jotted down a brief description of what had happened. Her goal had shifted. This restaurant would no longer be just another review, but a place where she would fight for justice and respect. As Lisa returned home, her thoughts circled around what had happened. She couldn't simply ignore the humiliation she had experienced at L'Elegance. This restaurant was not just one among many she'd visited. It reflected the systemic problems she had faced her entire life. Lisa remembered her childhood, when her mother told her how hard it was to make progress when you were judged based on your appearance. Her mother said Lisa's life would be more challenging, but that it was what gave true value to her dreams and achievements. Lisa also remembered her own journey. Starting with a small column in a local magazine, she'd worked her way up to where her opinion could determine the fate of restaurants. Yet how many times had she heard whispers behind her back, doubts about her competence, solely because of her skin color? These memories, both bitter and inspiring, fueled her resolve to act. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Raymond was discussing his principled stance with his staff. Some of the waiters showed mild doubts, but Raymond tolerated no dissent. "Some people simply aren't right for our establishment," he said firmly. "We adhere to a certain level, and this isn't a place for just anyone." Although no one dared to contradict him, a few waiters exchanged wary glances, realizing that behind this level lurked disdain and prejudice. Among the guests in the restaurant was an elderly man, a well-known blogger who had happened to witness the scene. Lisa's unusual behavior had caught his attention, and he overheard some of Raymond's comments. Pretending not to notice, the blogger watched the situation, fully aware that he was witnessing something outrageous. Waiting for the right moment, he discreetly took a few photos of the dining room and noted a few remarks from the staff to capture important details. The next day, Lisa contacted a journalist who often published reports on cases of discrimination in restaurants and public spaces. She shared her story, and the journalist promised to conduct his own investigation, but suggested Lisa herself return to the restaurant and attempt to replicate the situation to gather more evidence for the article. Lisa decided to accept the challenge. She was now determined and ready to step back into l'Elegance, knowing that her every move and word would be closely scrutinized. She understood this wasn't just a story about an unfortunate evening at a restaurant. It was a chance to show everyone that bias should be exposed. Lisa returned to l'Elegance a few days later, but this time she was prepared. She invited a journalist friend to secretly record the events and equipped herself with a hidden camera to capture every detail. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and slight fear, but her resolve to handle this was stronger. When she entered the restaurant, Raymond immediately recognized her, and his face tensed. Approaching the host stand, Lisa calmly asked for a table, hoping she would be treated appropriately this time. But Raymond made no move to help her, instead giving her the same excuse. "Sorry, but we're fully booked tonight." Lisa felt anger boiling inside, but kept her composure. She looked around the dining area, once again noticing empty tables, and gently asked, "But I see there are open seats. Could I perhaps wait, or maybe order something at the bar?" Raymond, looking at her with a cold stare, moved closer and replied with irritation in his voice. "I told you, we're full. Our restaurant doesn't serve those who don't meet the standards. Maybe you should find another place more suited to you." These words made the people nearby freeze. A few guests sitting close by began whispering, casting cautious glances at the scene. One guest even stood up and looked at Raymond with reproach. "Excuse me, but what you're doing is outrageous. She just wants to have dinner." Raymond turned sharply to the man and said coldly, "This is my restaurant, and I decide who gets served here. If you don't like it, the door is over there." This response caused a slight stir and discontent among the guests. Many pulled out their phones and started recording, understanding that this could escalate into a scandal. Meanwhile, Lisa turned on the recorder on her phone to capture every word and comment. Her journalist friend was also documenting the scene, gathering evidence for the article. Raymond was beginning to lose his temper. He noticed the cameras and grew even angrier. "Do you think you can just come in here and tell me how to run my place? I have every right to refuse service to anyone." At this point, the situation reached its peak. Lisa, calm and firm, addressed him. "You know, I'm a restaurant critic, and this situation, this restaurant, your words, all of it will be the subject of my next review. You can be sure that everyone will know what's happening here." Raymond froze, realizing the mistake he had just made. His face paled and he tried to justify himself, but it was too late. Other guests had gathered around, recording every moment. Raymond understood he had lost control of the situation. Lisa confidently headed for the exit, her friend following, still recording. At the door, she cast a final glance at the restaurant and firmly said, "This place deserves attention, but not the kind you're used to." Part 4. The following morning, the story about l'Elegance spread across the internet. Videos shot by Lisa, her journalist friend, and other patrons instantly went viral, and the response was immediate. In the comments, people condemned Raymond and expressed support for Lisa. Anti-discrimination groups took up the case, demanding a public apology and reforms at the establishment. Public outrage was growing, and the restaurant found itself at the center of a scandal. A few hours after the story broke, Lisa received a call from the management of l'Elegance. On the other end was the general manager of the company that owns the restaurant chain, and he was clearly nervous. He apologized to Lisa for Raymond's behavior and explained that such incidents were unacceptable for their brand. Remaining calm, Lisa replied that apologies weren't what mattered, but actions, and she suggested mandatory training for all staff on equality and respect for customers. She knew that one statement wouldn't change ingrained prejudice, But training could be the first step toward transformation. Meanwhile, panic set in among the restaurant staff. Raymond, trying to control the situation, gave several orders and tried to justify himself to his employees. But many of them began to question his authority. Waiters who had previously feared to disagree now openly discussed what had happened, and some even supported guests who refused to pay for their meals in protest. One staff member, realizing how serious the conflict was becoming, recorded an additional video apologizing and posted it online. Soon after, Raymond received instructions from headquarters. He was suspended from his position. His face went pale as he realized he hadn't just lost control of the situation, he had lost his job. His colleagues, many of whom had long been displeased with his management methods, breathed a quiet sigh of relief. A week later, L'Elegance officially announced that they would be implementing training courses for employees and appointing a new manager known for his openness and respectful treatment of customers. The restaurant's website also included an apology to Lisa and everyone who had faced prejudice. The story gained attention in the media, and people across the city learned about the changes. Lisa finally felt satisfied. She knew her efforts had made a real difference. She wrote a final review, highlighting the importance of change, and expressed hope that L'Elegance would become an example of the need to fight discrimination and strive for equality. Though the restaurant saw a sharp drop in patronage, it began to attract a new audience. People who valued the changes and the new attitude toward guests. Lisa continued her work now with even greater determination to expose injustice.